Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio. Welcome to week 7 of the Planning a Quilt series, and today I'll be putting on the binding of the Quatrefoil quilt and the label. So I hope you'll stay with me and I'll show you how I'm going to bind the quilt.
The binding was cut out at the beginning of this whole series when I was cutting the fabric to piece the blocks together, and that was labeled and put in my storage box, and I cut that binding at 2 1/8 inches wide. That I have found out that with my way of quilting and the batting that I use, that's a good size to use. Now you can use whatever you want. If you like 2 1/4 inches or 2 1/2 inches or 2 inches, anything in between, go ahead and cut your binding that way. Now I'm making a mitered corner for my binding pieces when I sew them together, and so I'm overlapping them right sides together at a right angle there, 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to stitch from one corner to the opposite corner. And I have those pieces overlapped a little bit so that there's a little hanging over at the top and on the right, and that just helps me visually to see where I need to start and stop my stitching. Now the thread I'm using matches the binding. It's an all-purpose thread, and it's just a regular weight. It's probably about a 40 weight, I would think. And why I'm doing that is because the binding is dark, and what I've been piecing with is a 60 weight or a 50 weight cream colored polyester thread. And when those pieces are sewn together and the seam is pressed open, there's a good chance you could see those stitches, and I don't want that showing in my binding, so I switch thread colors in the bobbin as well as the needle. So I have 5 strips of fabric to sew together here to make the full length of the binding, and I just do one seam at a time, and then I trim my threads. Now you don't have to do it that way. You could just do it like you're chain piecing a quilt, and just sew one seam right after another, and they're all chained together. I don't do as well with that. It bothers me having all of that fabric bunched up, and I have a little bit of trouble controlling the seams. They want to go crooked on me, so I don't do it that way, but you certainly can if you want to. You can also do a butt joint where it's a straight seam instead of a mitered seam, and you can do it that way too if you want. There's less of a seam there, but it's a little bit more obvious because it is a straight vertical and horizontal line is what you're going to see in your binding. This way, when it's on an angle, for some reason your eye doesn't zero in on that as much. I think it's just human nature to see straight lines, and so I prefer to do the miter. Now here I'm trimming off the excess fabric, and I'm leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'll take it to the ironing board, and I will press those seams open and then press the binding together lengthwise, wrong sides together, and then that'll be ready to apply to my quilt. And now I'm going to get ready and press this all down, and I've got the wrong side facing up, and I'm just going to fold it in half right here and press it with a hot iron. And there's no steam on this iron at the moment, it's just dry, but you can use steam if you want to. And then as I come to the seams, I will go ahead and press them open, and then continue to press that binding in half. Now this takes a while because that's a lot of binding. I mean, this quilt isn't that big. It's only, I think, 48 inches square, but it just, that's still a lot of binding. So it'll take a little while.
I'm going to take this end. This is the end I'm going to start with as I'm sewing it onto the quilt, and I want to make a 45-degree crease in here. So I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to fold it so that I have a little extra on the end here, and make sure I have it at a 45-degree angle there, and press it flat, and then I'm going to fold it and press it again. And then I'll lay it out on my quilt, and then I'll start attaching the border from a few inches down below that, and I'll show you that in the next step.
Now I'm ready to sew on the binding, and I have my binding rolled up, and I have the end that I press the 45-degree angle fold in. That's the end I'm going to start with. So I've got that ready, and I just need to open the quilt and choose a place to start. And I usually will start somewhere away from a corner, at least a few inches down from the corner of the quilt. I like to go about halfway if possible. And I'm going to leave a tail of the binding free, not stitched down, and it'll be about 4 to 6 inches long. The longer it is, the easier it is to do the attaching the two ends of the binding together when you get to that point. So I have actually probably about 8 inches right there, it looks like. And I have a walking foot on, and what that will do is feed the quilt through at the same rate as it does the binding. So it's got feed dogs top and bottom so that you can feed everything through evenly, and that will help avoid your binding from puckering up on you. So that gives you a good finish. Now I've got I'm sewing with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm using my dark thread again, and I've lengthened the stitch length to about 2.5. Now if your hopping or your walking foot is like mine, it doesn't have a mark on it for 1/4 inch. Now my bed of my sewing machine does, but sometimes it's hard to see because the edge of the quilt is right up against it, and it's real easy to cover it up and not be able to see it. So what I will do sometimes is use a piece of washi tape or a piece of this glow line tape that I'm cutting here. That's about 2 inches long, and I will tape it right along that 1/4 inch mark on the bed of my machine. Just have to be careful not to get it too high up so that it's covering up your feed dogs, because that will just pull it right through your machine and cause problems. So just place that where you can see it. There are guides that you can buy to align all of that if you want to, but I don't own those, so I just use the tape method, and that works really well. You can also notice that I don't have my binding tape pinned down. I'm just holding it in place as I'm sewing.
Okay, this is my last full border, and then I just have the turn the corner and finish the other side. Now I also have a video online on how to attach your border on your long arm if you have a long arm machine. So you can do it that way. I can't say that it's any faster, but it's convenient. And it takes a little more work to be accurate because you have to use a ruler to stay on your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's, but it is a possibility, a way to do it. Okay, as I get to the corner, I'm going to stop with 1/4 of an inch left to go here. And then I'm going to back stitch. and then pull it out and cut my threads. And I have some thread tails up here I want to get rid of. And then just turn the quilt. And what I want to do is to fold the binding back up out of the way. And what that's doing is just making a straight line like this. And it's making a 45-degree angle there. And then fold it back and line it up with this raw edge. And then I want the top here to line up with the top here. So this fold on the binding needs to line up with that. So I'm just going to hold that in place and go back under the presser foot and start a 1/4 inch down from that raw edge, a 1/4 inch from this raw edge. And then stitch it down. So now I'm ready to go to close to the beginning point here. Okay, so I've got my beginning point right here, so I'm going to go ahead and backstitch and trim threads. And now I need to connect these two ends. So what I'm going to do is trim off some of the excess. So I'm going to make sure I have plenty that is folded over so they're overlapping. And then I'm going to tuck this in here into this fold and fold it over. And I want to make sure that it is all, you know, smooth and tight in there. I don't want a lot of give in the fabric, so that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. Okay, I got those two. Now I want to open it up at the inside here and still hang on to this. So I'm trying to keep my pieces together here. And then we get a pin. I want those edges to be perpendicular to each other. And I'm lining up the crease that was formed with this angle here to the raw edge. And then pin that. Okay. I'm going to fold the quilt. And what I want to do, make sure, is that I'm sewing on the right side. So, okay, I want to sew this way. So let's fold this in half and get the majority of the quilt out of the way. And then I want to stitch right down that crease. This is the crease that was formed, that I formed when I was sewing the binding pieces together, and I was pressing the binding. That's where that crease was formed. So get my needles started right there. And remove pins as I go. Now if you want to do just a straight edge join, that's a lot easier, but I don't like that because then you've got all those layers coming together at your binding, and it's hard to stitch it at that area when you're doing the hand stitching. So I prefer this mitered join. Okay. And cut my threads. All right, now when I open the quilt, fold it back out, this binding should be the right width, and my seam is on the inside, so this is what that looked like. And now I'm going to trim these edges here. So this is just 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. Trim that, and then I'm going to trim the dog ears that are formed. And then I'm going to finger press this open. And then fold it back, and then fold that seam. Okay, so now I just need to finish stitching this down, so I'm going to go back to where I ended and line everything back up again, and back stitch a few stitches, and just have to make sure that all lines up close to with the raw edge there is what I'm checking on. I'm getting close to my beginning point, so I'm just going to stitch to that and back stitch, and then the binding's on. I know it's a little bit difficult to see that miter that I did, especially with this fabric being dark and just position of the camera, but if you want to do just, instead of the mitered corner, if you want to do just the straight edge, you just need to overlap your pieces, and then have them overlap by 1/4 of an inch and cut there, and then sew the pieces together instead of doing that miter, which can be a little hard to manipulate. You can do that. So next thing I need to do is, now I'm going to press these open is what I'll do. I'll take this to the ironing board and I'll press this binding back, and then I'll be ready to clip it, and then I can hand bind it. Okay, so now I'm ready to press my binding back, and I will trim these threads here too while I'm at it. Just grab a pair of snips and just trim them off as I go. And I'm basically just going to press them back, and that's not much to it. Now if you've got something on your border that isn't going to take heat, you'll have to be very careful with that. Maybe lay a pressing cloth over it, like if you have metallic thread, or if you have you know, a clear thread. I'm trying to think of the name of it now. Monofilament thread that won't handle the heat. You'll have to be careful with that.
Once I have that binding all pressed out, I get my Wonder clips out, and I'm going to fold the binding to the back side of the quilt and place my Wonder clips to keep that in place. Now there's other things you can use to hold it in place. You can use straight pins, you can use paper clips, you can use binder clips, whatever you've got. Now at the corner, I'm going to pull the binding back away from the quilt, and then I'm going to cut that corner off right at a 45-degree angle, being careful not to clip into the binding. And then I'll just fold the binding over to the back side, and that will form the corner. And to form the miter, I'm going to fold that binding straight up so that it makes a straight edge there, and then fold the top part of the binding down over that, so it will create a miter. So you can see here where I've got that pulled straight up, and makes kind of a 45-degree angle there at the fold, and then I will fold that down over the part that I just pulled up, and then I've got my 45-degree miter there. So I'm going to place another wonder clip there and hold it in place, and then just continue to put my wonder clips in wherever I need to. I usually go about 3 to 4 inches apart and put those in place. Now here is a photograph of the label that I put in this quilt, and it was made on my computer on some computer printable fabric and an inkjet printer. One thing you can do is you can print these out in color if you want to, but I chose just to use black and white. I have the name of the quilt. I have a statement as to why it was made, like it was for my YouTube channel, and I have the year, and then I have pieced and quilted by me. I have my name on there and the city and state where I'm living at the time. And then I just put a little piece of clip art in there that's copyright free at the bottom, just to kind of jazz it up just a little bit. Now here's the finished quilt. I have it pinned on my design wall. You can see that the binding is all attached and the quilting's all complete, and it's ready to use now. So I think this turned out pretty well, and I really enjoyed doing this project, and I hope you enjoyed watching it and maybe give this one a try yourself. I do have the pattern up on my blog, and there will be a link in the description box below where you can get that if you want. So I hope you will give it a try.
Well, that's it for this video and for this series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. So if you did like this video, please click the like button, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you are all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.